In today's video, we're going to talk about why most altcoins are still completely stuck in a bear market. This is really super important to understand because a lot of people are wondering, Bitcoin is hitting one all-time high after another, climbing steadily, but when it comes to altcoins, not much is happening in comparison. I mean, Bitcoin is way above its all-time high, while with altcoins we've seen some minor breakouts here and there, but they were sold off immediately, and overall altcoins are currently really weak. And that's the problem. People see Bitcoin rising, then look at the altcoin performance and ask themselves, what's actually going on here? You just have to understand that altcoins are still in the bear market, while Bitcoin has been in a bull run for a long time. And now I'll explain to you why that's the case. Actually, it's not me explaining it, but the largest bank in the world, JP Morgan. They published an article in which they clearly showed that MicroStrategy accounted for nearly 30% of the entire Bitcoin increase over the past year. I mean, since the beginning of 2024, we have seen almost 200% gains up to this point, just with Bitcoin. And JP Morgan makes it very clear, 30% of that was solely due to MicroStrategy. And I can also tell you right away what the other percentages were, the Bitcoin ETF. We know very well that a ton of money has flowed into the Bitcoin ETF. Both of these factors were responsible for Bitcoin's rise last year. We have players here who have pumped a lot of money, a lot of liquidity into these markets. Accordingly, we were in a bull run with Bitcoin, but we weren't in a bull run with the altcoins, because in this case we don't have any players pumping in multiple billions there. And the general public is currently not accumulating altcoins, and I'll explain why. This is almost entirely due to the Fed balance sheet. I think you know this by now. The Fed balance sheet increased dramatically during the pandemic. Since then, money has been continuously withdrawn from the markets. This money is being deliberately held back to reduce inflation. And that's why we can't see an altcoin season. Because in the past it was like this, only when we saw an expansion of money supply here could we also see a drop in Bitcoin dominance. Currently, money is being withdrawn from us all the time. Accordingly, we're seeing Bitcoin dominance, and with Bitcoin dominance, there just isn't much money left for altcoins. It's logical, and that's really the main reason why altcoins are performing so poorly right now. I mean, just look at this altcoin season index. It feels like we're at an all-time low. There are a few altcoins that have outperformed Bitcoin, but in comparison, that's really not many. Most altcoins have actually performed significantly worse than Bitcoin here. Normally it shouldn't be like this because with altcoins, much less money needs to flow in compared to Bitcoin. This just shows that altcoins are still completely stuck in a bear market. But that can change, and now we'll talk about what needs to happen for that to change. Because let's take a look. What needs to happen economically for things to change here? And what needs to happen from a technical analysis perspective for things to change? I mean, just look at this index. This index reflects the uncertainty in the economy. Look at where we currently stand. We haven't seen this level of economic uncertainty in 100 years. I mean, even during the coronavirus crisis, the markets were much more stable. And some people are still seriously asking why only Bitcoin is performing right now, why the altcoins aren't getting any traction. It's because we simply haven't had the right market phase for that. But if we zoom in a bit, we can see that things have already cooled off quite a bit here. And that's exactly what I'm observing right now. We've really been through some very uncertain times, but things are clearly getting better at the moment, and the recession indicator is also trending significantly downward. We really could have slipped into a recession, but now we're gradually pulling back from that, and it's slowly starting to look less and less like a recession. And that's what I see from an economic perspective, where I can say, I really like that. Now let's move on to the question. What actually needs to happen economically for something to change in the market, especially with altcoins? Put simply, global uncertainty needs to decrease. You just have to look at the price of gold and you'll immediately see, from a global economic standpoint, we're in a crisis. And I just showed you that again, but as I said, it's slowly starting to ease. But I think you can see it quite clearly from a gold chart because it always represents the real economy pretty well. Gold is only this high right now because we've had such economic problems, or in some cases still do. People fled to gold as a safe asset because, from a global economic perspective, things just didn't look good. As I said though, we're slowly starting to see a slight improvement there as well. Another important factor would be interest rate cuts, and Year 2, we will definitely see rate cuts this year, and we can see that the direction we're heading in now is the right one. This is the right direction because the first interest rate cut is already expected in September. And then in October and December, we have 2 more potential rate cuts. This year, 2 rate cuts are already expected, and that is very, very positive for the overall markets. That eases the markets even further, because what is also very important is an expansion of the money supply. And we will see that since we are also seeing US interest rate cuts, that goes hand in hand to some extent. First, the Fed itself has already announced that it will not continue this restrictive monetary policy for much longer, and that it will also slowly start printing money again. Because the crazy thing is, the US has massive debt, and this year alone, 9 trillion in debt needs to be repaid. These debts are then subject to interest at the government bond rates, and the 10-year government bond rates were at times at 5% this year. We've now corrected down a bit to 4.3%, but that's still far too high. It's way too expensive to refinance $9 trillion at such a high interest rate. The US won't put itself through that. And to change that, the US either has to lower interest rates, print money, or buy government bonds. In any case, that's positive for Bitcoin, because if they lower the interest rates, more money automatically flows into the market. If they start printing money, more money automatically enters the market, and if they buy government bonds themselves, they also have to print new money for that. That means, in any case, the US needs additional capital just to keep this house of cards alive. Accordingly, I believe that by the end of this year, we can definitely expect some good economic days. So now let's talk about what is technically important for an altcoin season from a chart perspective. And for the first point, I would say right away, Bitcoin dominance has to fall. That's extremely important. But as I've shown you, it's also very closely tied to the Fed's balance sheet. If we continue with this restrictive monetary policy, Bitcoin dominance won't be able to fall. However, since we are very likely to see interest rate cuts and an expansion of the money supply, that will be really positive for Bitcoin dominance. Additionally, you can look at other chart indicators. For example, we can look at the altcoin chart here. This chart only concerns the altcoins. And here we can see very clearly that although we've already had some good phases in the cycle, we've also experienced a strong correction back down. The market was deliberately pushed down step by step so that the cycle would be prolonged as much as possible. But there are indicators that show us very clearly how and when we are in a bullish impulse and when the altcoins are really performing well. Specifically, this is the 50 EMA on the weekly basis. Take a look at the last cycle. When we broke through it, here, I'll zoom in a bit more so you can see it better. When we broke through here, we really heated up in a strong bullish impulse. And the 50 EMA even acted as resistance here. The 50 EMA is extremely significant. So when we fell below it, we were in the bear market, but when we broke out above it, the altcoins were able to perform again. Exactly the same thing here, and right now we're just below the 50 EMA. That means if we manage to break through it sustainably now, that would be extremely positive for the altcoins right away. The 50 EMA is extremely significant when it comes to altcoins, because every time we broke above it, the altcoins performed really well again. In the same way, you can also look at the OBV MACD. This is a MACD trend indicator. It clearly measures what kind of trend we're in. This is also partly related to volume. This indicator detects trends early and can also see, for example, when trends are coming to an end. Because, you have to imagine here at the double top during the 2021 bull run, most people thought Bitcoin was going to 100,000 and that we would keep overheating. But the trend indicator had already signaled the trend quite early here, indicating that we would first correct, and accordingly, we even entered the bear market. This trend indicator is extremely meaningful on the monthly view, so you should definitely keep an eye on it. I also find it interesting at the moment, even in this cycle, we already had a nice upward trend, but even this small upward trend was considered a negative trend here. But right now, things are looking very good, because it seems like we're building up a positive trend again here, and that definitely makes me optimistic for the rest of this year, as long as we can maintain this trend with the altcoins. Lastly, Bitcoin also needs to overheat. That's, of course, extremely important. As soon as Bitcoin overheats, that's when the money gets shifted into the altcoins. That's always been the case in the past. First, Bitcoin has to overheat significantly in the short term so that the altcoins can follow suit. And finally, we still need real FOMO. And in the end, FOMO is connected to everything else. FOMO comes when Bitcoin overheats. When a few altcoins also start to go crazy here and there, everything comes together and then we can experience a huge, gigantic euphoria phase. And that's why I still believe that we'll see some nice altcoin days in this cycle as well. Basically a little altcoin season. Maybe it won't turn out the way it did in the past, that's possible, but I believe that we'll still see some really great altcoin days this year. And I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like and a comment. And with that, I'd say see you next time, friends.